In this lesson, you're going to get the key to the successful work with Photoshop. And I'm talking about adjustment layers, which are absolutely the base of the good work with Photoshop. You cannot be successful, you cannot create an amazing images if you don't know the basics of adjustment layers, because adjustment layers are something you're going to work with all the time. There is no project where adjustment layers are not involved. So that's why it is so important, and that's why this lesson is so important. As you remember from the previous lesson, I was opening image and choosing adjustments. It's very connected to the adjustment layers, but let me explain the adjustment at first to make you better understand the adjustment layers. As you can see, when we open this, we have a lot of different adjustments. You can probably know what is brightness, contrasts, maybe not much about level and curves if you just started. If you started, for sure you know this because it's super basic. Then we have other adjustments and even more on the bottom. So what these are? In the first section, we have adjustments which are pretty much responsible for contrasts. And you can notice this after this mentioned first brightness and contrast adjustments. Also, we have levels, curves, and exposure when we're going to set up exposure. So it's also about the contrast. Curves also, we set the balance between the dark areas and bright areas and also the colors, and the same levels, which are very similar to this, we're going to set the balance between the white color and black color. So it's all about the contrast. The next section is about color effects. You have vibrance mentioned in camera raw section, hue, saturation, color balance, black and white, photo filter, etc. So you can actually notice this section is about colors, contrast, colors, and the last sections is more about creative use. These adjustment layers are a bit for more creative work, not so basic are colors and contrast, but we have also shadows, highlights, HDR tuning, etc. So before, what I was doing, I was choosing adjustment layer. Right now I'm using once again brightness and contrast because it's super basic and very easy to understand this. And for example, we changed the image. So what we did, we actually pull up some contrast and take down some of the brightness. And it all looks fine. You might think, yeah, that's a great image. We did what we wanted to. We wanted to pull down the brightness and bring up some contrasts. But there's one thing which is very wrong. What if we want to change something? And let's look into our layer panel. There's no way to change this. There is no other layer because we work like this in the destructive way. That's the way you work destructively. Of course, we could choose other adjustment layer. I'm going to give you an example just very quickly. For the difference, I'm going to choose hue saturation to make this a bit saturated, hit OK, and once again, we did this, what we wanted, but if we want to change something, if we want to manipulate, if we want to change something with this hue saturation or our brightness and contrast, there's no way to change it right now. Of course, we can do a step back and it's all back, but it's not something we want. We want to have real impact for improving and changing our effects anytime we want. So at this point, let's go back to our image we started with, and when you open another option from the menu bar, layer, open the layers and find new adjustment layer. That's something we are looking for. And you can see, and the first thing you can actually notice here is a bit less adjustment layers than adjustments in general we saw before, and few of them is a bit different. And the reason is because some of the adjustments we cannot make in this way. There is not all of the adjustments are available as an adjustment layers. So that's why not all of them are here, but the specific things about them, they are so programmed that everything you can do as an adjustment layer is as an adjustment layer, so we can work non-destructively, and the thing that works in different way, they have different specific, and it's not destructive way because we're using them for different tasks. So that's the basic thing you can know. And look what is happening. I choose new adjustment layer, and I'm choosing brightness and contrast. And I need to call this, I'm just going to call this brightness contrast 1 as it is, hit OK. And what you can see right now, we just created new adjustment layer. It's not affecting our original layer. So let me set up brightness and contrast right now. I'm going to pull down the brightness as before. I'm going to pull up the contrast as before. And okay, right now, by the fact that I created this adjustment layer, I did not affect my original layer. So I work non-destructively. I can turn off this anytime to have a look. And also, I'm going to create another adjustment layer, which is called hue saturation. I'm going to leave the name hue saturation. I'm going to pull up the saturation right now. And okay, and I created another adjustment layer. So the more adjustment layers create, you're going to see all of the layers in your layer panel. And the thing I said before, the great thing about this, we can change our brightness and contrast anytime. We can change the value of our adjustments anytime we want. So for example, I think the brightness is too low. I want to change the brightness into 30, and also I think the contrast is too high. So I want to change this right now. So okay, as you can see, we can change this anytime. Another fantastic thing to notice about adjustment layers is we already have layer masks on these adjustments. Remember what I said in the previous lesson? We're not using eraser tool to change the effect, but we are using layer masks. So let's have a look. I'm going to choose black color right now. I'm going to choose a brush. I'm going to change the brush size into a bigger one, something like this. Or you can also change this by shortcut. And what I'm going to do, or what I want to do, I don't want all of the image be saturated right now. So I'm going to paint this with color black. Maybe I'm going to do a step back because I see my brush seems to be hard-edged. I want soft-edged brush for the better result. And look, I'm painting on this white layer mask with the color black, and I keep half of the image as a saturated and half of the image as a not saturated. So let's pull up the saturation even stronger to make the effect more visible. So I'm going to make the saturation at 100% right now. It doesn't look well, but it's going to help with the explanation. We really oversaturated this image. As you can see, we remove this. And if we want to bring up the effect, for example, I'm going to change color of my brush into white one. And I think I want to paint the street like this now, because I like the color of the street, so I want to paint this like this. So I'm painting with color white on the layer mask, and I'm bringing back the previous effect. The other thing which is worth to notice, as you can see, we have option like opacity over here. I'm going to explain you differences between fill and opacity, but right now just take care about opacity. So I'm going to take down this, and let's have a look. I'm just changing the value of the opacity to 50%. And what you can notice on the image, we just changed the opacity of this effect, this hue saturation effect. We pull this down to the 50%. So right now we only applying 50% of these adjustments into our project. So we can set the value of how strong we want our effect to be. When we pull this down to 0, it won't be available. When we pull this up just to 20%, it will be very soft effect. Around 50% will be half of this, and 100 totally all the effect. I'm going to turn this off, this layer. The other thing about layer masks, which is very useful with the adjustment layers, let me do one thing. I'm going to make the contrast way bigger right now, and brightness going to take down. And if we want to apply this effect into just a specific area, what is better to do sometimes to invert this white layer mask. To invert the layer mask, we can press Ctrl or Command and I, and what happened right now, this layer mask become dark. As you remember, dark color, this adjustment layer, this layer is invisible, white color, it's visible. So when I invert the color into the black one, this effect, this brightness and contrast effect is not visible on this layer. But right now, when I'm choosing the white color of the brush and I paint with white color on this layer, I'm just bringing back this effect. This is a very important thing for you to remember. I have some friends, actually, they always ask me about help with Photoshop, and they have some problem. For example, they say the effect disappear. If the effect disappear, it means by accident they inverted, for example, the layer mask, or they cannot do something. If you have problem, always check the layer masks. If you have any problem, the problem probably is with the layers. For example, you cannot paint on something, just check if your layer mask is selected right. If you don't see the effect, see the color which exists on your layer mask. So as you can see, the layer mask balance always between black and white color. Of course, if we're going to choose some gray color, it will be softened, but of course it's going to affect our layer mask, as you can see, the same way, but as the gray color affects. So in the halfway, I could say, but pretty much layer masks are always about black and white color. So you balance between white and black color and only this range. So that was the most important thing I wanted to say about adjustment layers, that we always work with adjustment layers. We're not using just an adjustments because it's destructive way. Non-destructive way is adjustment layers. Of course, it wouldn't be really comfortable every time to hit layer and choose new adjustment layer and find through the adjustments. Of course, you can use short key, but what I recommend and what I personally prefer, always keep the adjustment panel open. If you don't see the adjustment panel, just hit window and find it here. I turn off the adjustment panel, but when I'm going to open the adjustment panel, it's always here. And let's have a look. Brightness, contrast, levels, curves. So all of the adjustment layer exists over here. So we can just hit this and we have this open. Other way to open this, when we're going to hit the very small icon on the bottom over here, this round, open this, and also here you have your adjustment layers. So I'm not really using the menu bar to open my adjustments, but I always use adjustment panel, or I'm opening by this small button on the bottom, and that's how I work, how I do my work in Photoshop. You can open, of course, more adjustments, hue saturation once again, maybe hue saturation once again, and right now I'm going to bring up some lightness, etc. So as you can see, we can create a lot of adjustments. And that's the basic thing you need to know about adjustment layers, also about layer masks. And I think I feel the subjects about layer mask. And in the next lesson, we're going to talk about the specific adjustment layers that you can go into use the most in Photoshop. Because as I mentioned before, adjustment layers, it's something we always work with.